Hey everyone, let's just dive right into this explainer and completely dismantle the myth that clear thinking is some kind of innate talent. It absolutely isn't. It is a highly trainable skill. Today, we're going to break down the science of exactly why our brains just freeze up during messy, complex decisions, and more importantly, how we can systematically train ourselves to think clearly when the pressure's on.
So why do really smart people get stuck? It's kind of ironic, right? If you are historically the designated problem solver, the person who wraps their head around complex systems, your very first instinct when you get paralyzed by a problem is usually to assume you just need to brute force a solution. You think, well, if I just sit here and stare at this long enough, the answer is going to come to me. But as we'll see, that gut instinct is actually the very thing keeping you trapped.
I mean, think about it. The ability to spot those missing connections while everyone else in the room is still stuck and confused is such a rare, high-value skill. Mastering this almost universally puts you in the top 1% of the most valuable people in literally any organization. But highly intelligent, high-functioning people frequently fall into three specific, deeply ingrained cognitive traps that actively destroy this clarity, and it just leads to intense overwhelm.
So, here is our game plan for today. We're going to cover the clear thinking advantage, then dive into Trap 1, thinking harder, Trap 2, capacity illusions, Trap 3, absolute certainty, and we'll wrap it all up with the high performer's mindset.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Trap 1, Thinking Harder.
When you hit a messy decision, your flawed instinct is probably just to think harder. You sleep on it, you run endless mental simulations in the shower, but consider the concept of working memory. Think of this as your brain's temporary workbench. It is fantastic at problem solving, but it is strictly limited in the number of things it can hold at any one given time. Trying to juggle 5 or 6 conflicting factors simultaneously literally overloads this workbench. So continuing to think harder doesn't actually resolve the issue, it just causes intense mental fatigue. Your clarity actually plummets the harder you try to force it. The fix here isn't to think harder, but to actually think less. You absolutely have to protect your working memory. We can do this by borrowing a brilliant concept from computer science called separation of concern. This principle basically dictates that when you have a massive, unresolved knot of problems, trying to untangle the whole thing all at once is a total waste of computing power. Instead, you isolate that giant mess into individual bite-sized components. The crucial takeaway here is that you have to swallow your pride a bit. Accepting that your working memory has hard limits isn't a flaw. It's literally just human biology. When you feel that thick fog of overload creeping in, immediately stop trying to solve the entire puzzle. Systematically separate the factors and strictly focus your thinking on just 1 or 2 pieces at a time. Resolve those, figure out how they connect, and only then bring in the next piece. It is a game changer for clearing the fog.
Moving right along to Section 2, Trap 2, Capacity Illusions.
This leads us to the massive illusion that feeling overwhelmed just means you lack the brainpower or the time. Picture the physical reality of an on-call doctor managing 150 patients. Over a brutal 5-hour shift, they might get literally 10 seconds of rest. If they struggle with a single catheter for an extra 10 minutes, they miss 5 urgent calls from nurses in the meantime. The absolute physical reality of that scenario is that you simply cannot get through all of it. The math literally does not allow it. And you know what? In business or high-stakes projects, we do the exact same thing. We look at a huge mess and panic, asking, how on earth do I get through all of this? But overwhelm is almost never a capacity issue. It is a triage signal. It's a blaring alarm bell demanding that you aggressively shift your mindset from pure execution to strict prioritization. You have to stop asking how to finish everything and start asking, okay, what is actually important to focus on first? Instead of stressing over how millions of tiny pieces connect, you strictly narrow your working memory to finding and attacking your singular constraint. This is known as the theory of constraint. You look at the mess and ask, what is the one biggest bottleneck that, if I completely removed it, would make every single other part of this system simpler and easier? You don't need to know how everything connects to know exactly what you need to do next. So how do we actually do this in real life? You build a dependency map. Just get it out of your head, dump every single blocker onto a piece of paper, and draw connecting lines between them. Your biggest constraints are going to become visually obvious almost immediately. And the secret sauce here? Proactively dedicate just 1 hour a week to your long-term constraints, things like learning how to learn. Because if you don't unblock those long-term things now, they are guaranteed to become urgent crises later.
That brings us to Section 3, Trap 3, Absolute Certainty.
This one is arguably the most dangerous pitfall for really smart people, the paralyzing desire for absolute certainty.
You want to be 100% right. But consider how a 95% confidence interval works in science. A medical study doesn't say a pill lowers blood pressure by exactly 10 points for every single person. It says 95 times out of 100, the result will safely land somewhere between 7 and 13.
Now, if you wanted to be absolutely 100% confident in your claim, what do you think happens to that margin of error? Intuitively, we assume more confidence means more precision. We think we need to say 10 points plus or minus 0.5. But the mathematical reality is the exact opposite, which is wild. To be mathematically more confident, you actually have to be less precise. You have to widely increase your margin of error. I can be 100% confident a medication will alter blood pressure by 10 points plus or minus 10 points, because that interval is so massive it literally covers an outcome of 0.
Because highly intelligent people often misunderstand this math. When they face messy, real-world decisions like designing a $1 million marketing campaign, they usually fall into one of two extremes. They make the overconfident move, entirely ignoring how much culture and business have changed, just blindly looking at last year's data and claiming absolute certainty. Or they make the paralyzed move, doing endless, agonizing rounds of testing and analysis to find the perfect message, which just stalls meaningful progress forever because the system is way too complex to ever give them 100% precision.
To break out of this trap, your goal shouldn't be perfect confidence. It needs to be accuracy. Shrink the precision of your claim by blowing up your margin of error. If you are building a sales funnel, stop demanding a guaranteed 10% conversion rate before you make a move. Instead, say, I am 99% confident our conversion will land somewhere between 2% and 7%. By establishing that wide, accurate interval, you've just created a completely safe range to build your plans around. You can set up the project so it survives a 2% result and scales beautifully at 7% without ever getting stuck in analysis paralysis.
And finally, Section 4, the high performer's mindset.
Let's pull all these tools together. The source material draws this really fascinating distinction between optical and real high performers. Optical performers are just playing the part, right? They fake total certainty in meetings just to sound perfectly confident. But real high performers, they absolutely do not fake it. They embrace the uncertainty, honestly adjust the scope of their decision based on the actual facts they have, and they just keep making progress.
If you want to immediately implement everything we've talked about today, the absolute simplest and most powerful tool you have is to start thinking on paper. Keep a notebook right next to you at all times. When you feel your working memory filling up, physically offload those complex dependency maps, triage signals, and confidence intervals directly onto the page. It saves your cognitive workbench for actual high-level problem solving instead of just using it for storage.
Now that you have the actual frameworks to bypass all that brute force thinking, it's time to execute. Stop trying to juggle everything in your head and stop demanding absolute perfection in a fundamentally messy world. So here's my question for you. What is the single biggest constraint you are going to map out and unblock this week? And honestly, what incredible things could you build if you were no longer getting in your own way? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.